is interested in doing some SFT work, as Jim just said. Now, today he's going to talk about how to use these frameworks to study phase perception. So let's welcome Mario Fific.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you inviting all us here, and I have to say that I really admire Cheng Tai, for his achievement in getting such an important grant. I was very surprised when he invited me to collaborate in a domain of phase perception. That would perhaps explain the way we first met. I met him several years ago at one international conference. I didn't know about Cheng Tai before. And I was going through the poster section, and there's so many posters there, and I was jumping this poster to that poster. And then I saw the poster that actually I can completely understand. And I turned to Cheng Tai and I had my eyes open like this. And he politely asked me, as it is practice, would you like me to guide you to the poster? And I said, no, I will guide you to the poster. I'll explain what's in the poster. So I just guide him, look, you have this, you find that, and then this is because I completely understand what he was doing, and this is because we share each interest in using the same tools. So I did 2 talks, and the first talk would be about importance of the mental architecture. So the main goal will be about that. But I have another one talk tomorrow, and I'm hoping that talk applies more tutorials, so to say, how maybe to use this material. So some things will not be spoken today. Well, we'll have to wait maybe till tomorrow. So I'll just carefully keep certain things. This particular research was done with the Jim Talent here, and he was my graduate student mentor, and we collaborate and we start to build up those new approaches to testing mental processes. Among them, we really focused on in the domain of phase perception. The name of this technology that we worked on is the systems here Factorial technology. Okay. So let me set up goals for this talk. First, we learned something about the procedural operational definition of holistic processing. Procedural operational definition, and how we define holistic processes. So also have in mind that when I say holistic processing, this is the same, I was pretty much have about the configural processing here, so I would not make a big difference about it as this. There's a kind of a flexibility between these two concepts, well, we can maybe start to differentiate, but it's not going to be the topic of this research. And the second goal is what is actually mental architecture, and what do we learn by understanding mental architecture and using mental architecture in the phase perception. And 3, why should we be using them, right? Or what do we benefit from them? So these are the 3 goals. We are trying to achieve them. Here's a typical prototypical situation in which holistic phase perception fails. So we have a little Red Riding Hood here, and she's not really able to holistically recognize that she's talking to a wolf, not her grandmother. She's paying attention to feature by feature. What about your eyes? What about your ears? What about your mouth, right? But if she was able to holistically see, she would probably see that this is not my grandma, but bad wolf. So this introduces us to the idea of a holistic hypothesis. In general, you can say that the objects are perceived as a whole entity, not as a set of independent features. Fitted to that one is analytic or feature-based perception. And so in contrast to the previous one, we here analyze, we're able to attend the features. This is a general definition of the holistic versus analytic process. And throughout the history, scientists in this area have been collecting many other ways how to identify the presence of holism. So if you have a look here to some of these concepts, like the Gestalt laws, Pop artifacts, particle paradigm, Garner tasks, superiority effects, different capture illusion, grotesque faces, face inversion, unitization, scrambled faces versus normal, narrow responses, how to narrow context effects, something that is closer to our interest, that Jim already mentioned about is a supercapacity index, and this one is the product from our kitchen, which is called co-activation signature too. So we see we have plenty of many of these different ways we can try to identify holism. The question is whether they are really good indicators of holistic processes or not. And we also pay special attention to this particle paradigm that has been used by several researchers before. So, seeing that, I'll try to introduce you about the procedural operational definition of holistic process interfaces. So let's see what's that. What do I mean by that? So one way to define holistic processes is to maybe use something that is called part-of-whole paradigm. So in this task, carried by Tanaka Senko 97, you learn Joe space, yes, and then you have to, in the task, to be able to recognize Joe's, let's say, nose in his old configuration, this is old face, or the nose in isolation, or nose in a new configuration. So that's the particle. So they try to investigate whether you can access the features selectively and disregard what happens with the background or the absence of the background. So one way to approach the holism is to try to find this failure of selective attention. If you cannot access selectively to independent features, then probably faces are processed more holistically, not as a parts. And here are the results. We can see in this experiment when you had tried to either attend to eyes, nose, and mouth of Joe, we see that recognition accuracy fails when compared to when this feature is embedded in the old learned configuration when this is new configuration and isolated parts. It happens with all these features. So this is the failure of selective attention to a certain facial feature. And so how does it work? I'll just try to come up with maybe a more visual way to give you the idea. Let's say this is a cognitive representation. This is what you have in mind. This is holistic now representation. And this is what's going to be displayed here. So let's say that you are shown this old face, and then you have to pay attention to that feature. Recognition, in this case, gives you relatively accurate response. Right? So this is kind of old configuration situation. If you have to pay, if you're presented only with the isolated feature, and this is what you have in mind, then what happens, after some process, you achieve certain accuracy, but now it's lower, right? Because you're just missing this context, so you're running into some errors from time to time. And then if you presented the same feature, but with a new background, so this is a new configuration, then it should be also difficult, to make this distinction. So this difference here between accuracy detection is called failure of selective attention. So we agree about what is failure of selective attention. Part of the whole paradigm, failure of selective attention. If you're working in a maybe analytic brain, and in analytic brain, you'll be maybe storing these representations like a feature-like representations. They're active, and then when you show the whole figure, the entire old configuration, you have some accuracy, right? If you show the isolation feature, like in this one case, categorization is accurate, and then in new configuration, does not matter. Pretty much, the idea here is if you're using analytic processing, then accuracy should not be affected much with the changing different contexts. So that's the idea. Let's call this roughly analytic, the strong analytic hypothesis here. So the idea, if you find failure of selective attention, that will indicate holistic, and if you don't find this effect, it will indicate analytic processes. And now we're approached to what is an operational definition of holistic perception. We say the holism is the same thing as a failure to selective attend to facial feature, regardless of the face context. Okay, so that is procedural operation because we define holism in terms of the way we conduct the study. Of course, this failure of selective attention is very important to understand certain processes in the face perception, but we say it's limited because it ignores important part of our processing machinery, such as we don't know anything what happens with the cognitive processes during that phenomenon. What do I mean by processes? We think that goes in a large area of what is called information processing systems. So what do you mean by this? Well, actually, I mean we know nothing about the mental architectures. The way the processes are organized, mental processes are organized underlying face perception. So this is the missing part. And what are actually the mental architectures? Maybe this is a second goal. Now we try to move to the mental architecture. Here, probably the best way to explain what I mean by mental architecture is to explain the properties of fundamental properties of cognitive processes, and we have three categories at least here. First one, specifying processing order. So we have a set of processes, maybe like feature detectors. Maybe they could organize in serial or parallel fashion. Here's another thing, they could organize maybe coactive fashion. I'll talk more about this. But this is the way processes are sorted. The second thing, we have to define stopping rule, right? When is enough for information accumulation, and when do you have to make a decision? If you can make a decision based only on processing one feature, then it's called terminated. If you have to process everything there, it's called exhaustive. So processing order, stopping rules. We have interdependency between features. So whether the features are dependent or independent. Jim mentioned about how big this problem is. What does it mean dependency? But here, largely we think this is whether the processes can occur without knowing anything about each other. This you can maybe if you have dependency violated, maybe the processes could be facilitatory or inhibitory. If they inhibit each other, maybe facilitate each other. And finally, we have something about the capacity. Capacity will be dealt, here in the other presentations, not this one. So we'll just quickly skip over this one. So here, I think this is a critical graph. We have different catalog of mental architectures. That is the missing part I was telling. And mental architectures here are, for example, this is a serial self-terminating system on processing two facial features. So you process eyes and lips. And this one in particular, you process first eyes, but you can stop after processing eyes and go to the decision stage and only make the decision based on eyes. And that is what we have OR gate. It could be serial exhaustive architecture, so we have to process both features and eyes and lips, and then we make a decision. That's why we have AND gate here. But processing is strictly sequential, right? Like here too. Parallel self-terminating, we process in parallel features. And first one that finishes will trigger the response. So we don't actually have to wait for the eyes. We just need the lips to trigger the response. This is OR gate. This is also called horse race model, right? And we have response. And here we have parallel exhaustive. We have to parallel process two features, but we have to process them both. This is AND gate here. E is the most interesting case for the particular presentation. We have two features, eyes and lips, but they are glued, they're funneled together in one channel. Here, instead of eyes and lips, now we have Joe's eyes, Joe's face. Sorry. So Joe, okay. So we have eyes and lips, but we don't see them in eyes and lips as independent features. We have them glued together in a configuration, and that configuration has been accessed, to make a decision. This is called coactivation. Two channels coactively start to be processed as one unit. So we have 5 different mental architecture. The missing link to understand better facial processing. So we can define maybe strongholism in terms of these properties, yes. And strongholism would require dependent features, would require coactive parallel architectures. We have to use exhaustively process all items, not skip some items. We have to have interdependency between processing units. They have glued together. So there could be strongholism. And then maybe analytic processing could be defined as we have independent features, maybe serial, maybe parallel architectures. Why not? Some researchers suggest parallel should be the defining quality of the holistic. Maybe not. Still as these features independent. That could be analytic processing. Definitely have to have termination stopping rules, so you don't have to process everything. You can skip some features. And then, we don't have this bluing, thing going on. So this would be definition of strong holism analytic processing on the one hand, on the other side. Now we can maybe put some labels next to each architecture. This one will be strictly analytic processing. This one, serial exhaustive, will be also analytic, right? Because you have to use in both cases serial, sequential, very slow processing, presumably. We have parallel processing here, terminating exhaustive. Eventually, maybe we can put a label here, holistic. This one's because it has to process both features, right? You cannot skip one, but they're independent, right? Yeah? And probably the strong holistic one will be labeled as a coact. That's where we expect, have strongest level of holism, etc. And another way maybe to look at the coactive processing is that maybe we build, this stuff, if this is not easily accessible, maybe to your easy recognition, maybe you can start with a parallel system of several facial feature detectors. And the way, that maybe coactive architecture could be built is by increasing the facilitation between feature detectors. So after some time, this will probably collapse, these independent channels of feature detectors in a single one, and will, lead to the design of a coactive system. That could look something like this. So I see that you can see connection between parallel and maybe coactive systems. So now we moved, from a procedural definition of holistic processing to cognitive process-based operational definitions of holistic phase perception. So we say holism is, let's say roughly, it's identified as a coactive mental architecture. Now we move from the one operational definition saying that we have defined holism in terms of how do we conduct, what kind of effects we found in our studies here, to a more deeper level about how the processes are organized. You see how we make this switch from the method, using methods to learn about some property, concept, to moving into more subtle understanding of how cognitive processes operate. Now the problem is how to identify these mental architectures in the first place, yes. Is there any simple way? And of course it is. For that we designed a system factorial technology, SFT here. And there's a history, of using system factorial technology. This is some of the people that work, maybe say, let's say up to 20 years ago, but more and more new research has been published in all different areas. So this is, I couldn't really fit, into this paper. Probably we're requiring a couple more pages. A very promising approach. Here's a crash course in SFT approach, and I'm going to tell you the details. I'll probably provide more details tomorrow, but just give you a couple of ideas, how this works. Yeah? So just keep it, try to keep it simple here. First, this is a non-parametric factorial method. Non-parametric here means no parameters. The models that are tested here are not described parameters. Usually when we have parameters, we try to fit some models, model fitting, optimization, no such things here. This is a great relief, for those of you who, work, very painstakingly to fit different models. You know how complicated this thing is. Now, this one does not have any of these. We have factorial manipulations, such as you have maybe ANOVA research designs. Well, we'll talk about that later. We use reaction time distributions. You have to get these signatures. Instead of model parameters and testing the models, we are here looking for the signatures of certain types of mental architectures. So have in mind these signatures. That is the aim of our SFT analysis. And we try to identify different mental architectures based on these observed signatures. That's very simple, right? So main diagnostic tool is survivor interaction conscious function, and that is the survivor function here. The survivor function, when is done by calculating these double differences, like factorially, manipulate the level of saliency of the levels of manipulations. Not going to really go into details in a moment. Tomorrow we'll give you exactly how what happens. But these are survivor functions observed survivor functions that you read from the data, for the reaction time data. And survivor function, we know it's look like this is a probability we haven't finished processing up to some point in time yet. Longer you have to wait. then it's highly likely that you have finished processing by the time. So this probability, it goes down. There's a reason for that, but it's really not big. That's really important. What is important is that all these different architectures that I described, a couple of slides ago, here, here, have their different signatures of a SIC function. So self-terminating model has this flat SIC function. So we got this signature flat function. Nothing happens here. Zero exhaustive model has this function that goes negative and positive, with an important constraint condition that negative part is equal to the positive part. The area should be equal. Parallel self-terminating model, this one, will have positive function all the way, all the time. This is time, now this is just the value of the function. So parallel exhaustive model, we have negative function, unlike just flipped one. And coactive model, we have distinct shape of a positive function, but with negativity, smaller negativity at the beginning. So in this case, we linked different signatures revealed by survivor interaction contrast function to different mental architectures. And we need to understand better mental architectures to be able to maybe label different levels of holism or analytic processing of faces, or maybe similar stimuli. And these are some of the observed signatures from the real data across different research, and you see they correspond to what we can observe, what we can predict in the model. In general, it really works well. Now we are up to the third goal in our research is why we should consider mental architecture to understand holistic face perception at all. Why we have to do that? What is the benefit? To better understand this, we'll try to make a connection between, try to find maybe, is there any architecture that can maybe generate failure of the selective attention, but which is not holistic at all? Now this is a good point, right? If we can show that, maybe this way would be a way to provide the good test whether failure of the selective attention is both sufficient and necessary indicator of holistic processing. Yes. If you find an architecture that is analytic based but predicts the same effect, then this signature of selective attention, failure to selective attention, a certain feature really fails in the attempt to be used as a good indicator. And that establishes mental architectures as a more important tool to understand these processes. And actually, the answer is yes. In a matter of fact, I will just give you a preview. The minimum time parallel self-terminating model, so-called horse race model, can predict the similar finding of the failure of the selective attention to features in the task that is very similar to the part of the whole paradigm I presented at the beginning. Horse race model is like, the first horse that finished the racing is the winner. And this is the same as the processes. The first facial feature that is detected will trigger the response. Model is being used on different occasions throughout the recent research history. A couple more indicators is that we have to have all facial features, yes, that are used in the task to be modeled at the same time. These all features race to be recognized. So this is a horse race. First to be recognized feature is used to make overall decision, and errors can occur because incorrect feature finishes first. So these are the rules, very simple, and within the domain or definition of the horse race model. So how does it work? Let's see another round of examples. Let's say that now we have both face features, both faces that are used in the task are in your memory, right? That is what this model assumes. But because this one is presented here, these features have a little bit better position in the memory, so they're maybe easily recognized. So that gives maybe this kind of accuracy, high accuracy effect here. Now here's another case in which we have different contexts, but the target feature is presented here. So now that we have the context features are better represented in the memory, and then this is a target feature here, so they are going to be racing mainly, and sometimes these guys will also race, but not that strong as the other
accurate features. So what happens, we see like in general there's a decline in accuracy in this case. And this is because accuracy goes down because sometimes, this feature which are not conclusive will finish first. So we see that this is a way to generate failure selector attention with a model that is very analytic. It's not holistic at all. So these are the simulation results, and I'm going to skip this one, but this gives you these activation levels of the features. They will give you pretty much these desired effect, and this is generate the data based on these values. So, but the point is, we can, with a reasonable set of assumptions, we can generate the failure of selective attention, which is not really indicating holism here, but something else. All right, so another thing is maybe we can ask about the credibility of the horse race model. Is it good enough, to maybe deal with this complex problem? Yes, of course. This been used widely in the different areas such as face categorization, detection, speed effect, global-local matching studies. So this approach has been used widely before in other studies. And finally, let me show the evidence from the OR task. And then in this particular, how do you stand with time? Do you have I guess you will have another task. So here's another line of evidence we run in our study, the variant of R-to-O paradigm in such called OR task. This is called disjunctive rule face classification task. I know it's maybe too much for you to memorize it, but the point is that this task kind of theorizes, termination, early termination on a certain stopping rules. So here's how it looks. The task is to find these two features, right? And this is the case where these two features are presented in isolation. You learn these features in the learned context. This is an old-face context, and this is a new configuration. So we tested, these three conditions. What happens with the categorization of these two features? The design that this disjunctive rule face classification task spans two-dimensional space on two configurable properties, eye separation here and ellipse position. So you see if you go here, we see that eyes are most separated, and here we see that the ellipse are from here to here going down the way from the nose. And factorial here means that we manipulated these four cases. Here will be enough to generate our SFT data. And HH, low H, high H, low, and low indicates different level of salience of each feature. That is actually explained by this, the presence of the two different rules that could be used to categorize these faces. So the rule 1 could be used maybe if this feature is presented. You could use rule 1 and say, okay, I'm going to pay attention to eye separation. If the eye separation that I see on these faces is lower on this value than the critical value, the rule value, I would say this is the gang member, right? If these eyes are separated, I would say, if I'm using only rule 1, I can say this is a hero guy. That's the idea here. And okay, or eventually I can use rule 2 maybe to generate and try to satisfy this rule and to make categorization of these two groups of faces. So you have two rules. And if you know that why is this OR task? Because you can terminate on processing on only one feature. That could be the non-serial or a parallel. That is satisfying either rule 1 or rule 2. That's why this is OR task. Right? So what we found is, this is reaction time, and here we have proportion of errors. These are reaction time data here. As you can see, the fastest reaction times are when you have to recognize those two face features within old phase, and the errors are the lowest here. And so that gives us immediately recognition of a failure to selective attention. It is much easier for us to categorize these faces because we can attend these features better than these features when these features are embedded in a new face or presented in isolation. Now the question is, what kind of mental architecture could be detected here? If we use system factorial technology to analyze these four faces, this is what we got. We got here survivor interaction conscious function signatures that are positive over time for all three different types of conditions. There's a difference in overall mean response time, but the signature is identical. And if you go back in time, you remember that this positive SAC signature indicates parallel terminating processing. So in order to make a decision in such a task, you have to, our subject process features in a parallel fashion, and they terminate it as soon as one of the features would be recognized. And we agreed, I guess, if you remember that too, that this is a very analytic way to seeing faces. There's not much, holistic here going on. All right. So these were three goals of our talks. First is we learned about the procedural operational definitions, and we learned about failure to selectively attend certain features by using part-to-whole paradigm. And although it's been used before as an indicator of holism, we challenged this approach by developing methods to learn about the underlying processing cognitive mental architectures. Unlike the procedural operational definitions, a cognitive process-based operational definition through the mental architectures revealed quite different picture than we expected and actually indicated analytic instead of holistic process. So mental architecture is very important companion to learning cognitive processes that may be involved not only in face perception, but maybe in object perception too. And that's a good reason why in the future studies we pay attention to this particular research design using system factorial technology as the ways to learn the better underlying structure of the cognitive processes. So we had three goals. I think they are very exemplary, and that will lead you to interesting conclusions here. I would just briefly just go over it again. So we demonstrated that parallel self-terminating model can also predict failure of selective attention, which is not really good indicator of holistic anymore because it's not sufficient indicator of holism. We need to pay attention to the tests for the mental architectures, presumably using system factorial technology. We can conduct such tests within the framework of system factorial technology. And by the way, the method, as I said, is non-parametric. I'll elaborate this more tomorrow. And of course, it's very interesting because I didn't say much about it, but you can analyze individual subject data, not only to pay attention to group analysis here. So that will be all. Thank you if you have any questions.
Thank you for your talk, very interesting. But I have a naive question. So I'm not so sure about the goal of this kind of approach. So you mentioned different kinds of architectures. So I was wondering, do you want to find out how human beings process space and which architecture is that? Or you want to see individual differences? Say some people tend to use some kind of architecture, or even within one individual you can use different types maybe based on the strategy or different things. So this is what I was wondering.
Thank you for this is a very interesting question. I think all of these are potential options open when using system factorial technology. So you can analyze different cognitive structures in different tasks. You can analyze different individual subject differences when using maybe the same task. As we published in one of the papers, for example, involving memory study, we show how different subjects in different conditions will use different cognitive mental architectures, serial and parallel. And then we can also, I think, analyze even group analysis data But that, that level of analysis is, it involves, a further collaboration and project, such as Professor Haupt, here, probably could maybe share more information about that. So all of these options that you mentioned are open and are friendly, with this approach. So there's no limitation or nothing that, prevents you from using it.
Maybe another good question is, so is it possible to have another kind of architecture that has the combination of coactive and parallel, so they exist simultaneously?
That is an interesting question. So it would be another interesting question is, I never considered that. I would rather see that eventually you can have, certain architectures can evolve into another architectures. As I demonstrated in one of the slides, parallel architecture could naturally turn into a coactive one, maybe through the process of learning, by increasing the interconnectivity between detectors of facial features or maybe object features. So if that happens, you would see that collapsing of a parallel maybe architecture into a coactive one. And why would that exist? Along, that is a good question. But mathematics here is pretty, also, of course, it is possible to test maybe probability mixture models of different architectures that can participate in the task. So we know the tasks take some time, and subjects maybe switch to one strategy in the first half of experiment to another set of strategy, mental architecture, another half of experiment. So you have a mixture of maybe serial and parallel processes, or maybe parallel and coactive.
I'm thinking maybe from biological reasons, so say, like for example, evolution, some new form, like this, like if the nature of combination is
It is, so the question is whether it is possible to switch, as I understand, to switch in maybe over through some instruction process or a learning process from one to the other. Yeah, I think it would be possible. And I think I'll mention, one of the cases in the next talk where you can, presumably the model allows you to, by modifying certain expectations of this cross-channel facilitation, you can switch between different types of architectures, yes. But, this is a really big question, how it happens if these architectures are really real, whether they really exist in the brain, or if this is just our imagination. Nobody knows that. We strongly believe, that they are there.
You might have answered half of my question, but how much do you think the task is defining the architecture? In a sense, your task was putting focus on the eyes, not on the face. So you have to more emphasis on the facial structure, on the feature of the face, rather than on the face on its own. What would happen if you are using a task where more emphasis would be put on the face itself?
This is also another good question. There's a lot of faith in the system factorial technology, the way we set up the exact experiment. So if you follow this consideration, the experiment has to be factorially organized across saliences and the features, which I really don't have time to explain here. But your idea here is that this experiment actually favorizes the analytic process, and that's right. We purposely kind of did it. Tomorrow I showed another manipulation, another design, which actually forces you to pay attention to entire ensemble of facial features. So you will start to pay more attention to face rather than eyes, But this is just, one example in which favorizes analytic processing. Eventually can terminate at a certain feature. The question is whether processing here is serial or parallel, right? But, this is still open question, so I agree with that.
Thank you. I guess I really look forward to how to use the methodology to the data I collected. But it occurs to me, like the conversation we had a few minutes ago, that you're taking a very different approach to the other people who are doing the face processing application. let me just sort of play the devil's advocate on the approach. The way this methodology seems to be very good at identifying the medical architecture, but it doesn't really explain why. For instance, if you say it is laid to show that you have a failure of certification, but why that happen? I mean, what is the outline? I mean, we know we sort of identify what is the characteristic of being in the state of failing to paying certification to parts of the features. The second question is people like Rossian in Belgium. He has proposed this idea about perceptual field. That is, we can actually alter the extent to which you pay attention to the face. So when you have the inversion, that will be the sort of extreme example where you really have to only focus on the single feature. And I wonder whether your architecture will allow that kind of variation. It seems to be, on the one hand, you have the holistic, on the other hand, you have just purely analytical. But it's likely there's something less early. And finally, I think the other consideration for the task limitation is very important. I don't see it here outlined that. Capacity limitation.
What limitations?
Capacity.
Capacity limitations.
Yes, so this is quick on capacity limitations. I really don't know. I mean, it's not easy to use the capacity limitations in this kind of designs. And actually, for this one, it is possible to use the capacity indexes in terms of, we did, we're doing the Townsend's lab. And, but the other designs, which is more interesting, to facial recognition that involves the processing the entire face, actually it's very hard to implement, a capacity limitation. But when we test in this particular task, we find there's a limitations in the capacity of processing the face features. That could be maybe due to the reasons where subjects are using mental parallel terminating mental processing. So you would just, stop as soon as you recognize either of the features for the analysis. But regarding to the first question is, so if I can reiterate, your first question was how that really happens, right? How do we start with processing our features in a certain order, and why choosing one architecture and not the other one, right? And frankly speaking, I don't really know why we do not specify with this methodology how do you develop these strategies. Probably there's a way to explain this, but we have to specify some kind of a learning mechanism, or how this maybe already existing mechanisms being used in our experience. What this methodology serves to give you the direct access to the processing strategy in the current task. So you can see this not as a model of a face processing, but as a method theory. So test for certain models of a processing. And Jim, has probably something to say here. Jim?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Jump in, but just a couple of the footnotes is that with regard to the sample inversion, some of our first applications down in the year 2000 applying these methods found that yes, you were better at hitting the features when it was inverted, but the processes were the same. So quite informative that everything was still parallel, everything was still somewhat limited capacity. You still could be analytic and self-terminate rather than having to process everything exhaustively. And yet, in a sense, analogous to here, because Mario also found that people were worse with the new faces than the old faces. But again, the processes were qualitatively the same. They were all doing them like parallel and so forth. So, I think again, it brings up the importance of asking the questions at different levels of the mechanisms.
All right, any questions? Okay, let's thank Mario. move on to the next talk. The next talk will be presented by Professor Daniel Little. Daniel Little is gifted and experienced scholar. I'm very happy to have the chance to collaborate with Daniel Little. And Daniel Little got his PhD in psychology in the University of Western Australia in 2008. And he went to James Lab to do postdoc for 2 years.
Actually, not Jim.
No,
Down
not
the
James.
hall.
Take credit though.
And then he went back to Australia to, now he teaches at the University of Melbourne. Daniel is interested in the categorization process and relates the categorization process to other cognitive processes. So let's welcome Professor Daniel.
Thank you. It's a huge honor to be here amongst all the other distinguished scholars, and it's my pleasure to also collaborate with Cheng Ta. I met Cheng Ta similar to Mario at a conference. So a lot of my research is interested in looking at some of the different empirical operational definitions of separability and integrality, and trying to use tools developed by Townsend and others to come up with some overarching theory for how each of these empirical regularities fit together. And one of them has to do with how efficiently you can apply your attention to separable dimensions compared to integral dimensions. And I was at a conference talking to somebody about all of these ideas, talking about salience and validity and so on. And I said, oh, you've got to go meet Cheng Ta. And I went, and of course he's doing all of the things that I was talking about in exactly the way that I would have done them. And it's been a real pleasure to come and see the work that he's doing in his lab. He's asking questions, and I'm speak directly to the things that I'm interested in. So this talk is done with a few collaborators. This is Ami Idols, another student of Jim's, who is flying the systems Factorial flag in Australia, along with myself, Mario, and my postdoc, Tony Lang. The work I'm going to talk about is really a culmination of work that began whenever I was working down the hall from Jim's lab. Mario had just left Jim's lab, and I was picking up some research that he had recently finished, where the idea was to apply systems factorial technology to tell apart different architectures for very basic, simple stimuli. So things which vary in their saturation and their size, which have very well-defined dimensions. And compare that with other things like integral dimension stimuli, such as colors varying in their saturation and their brightness, and so on. And we had a lot of success with this. Applying the system with the survivor interaction contrast, we were able to tell apart different architectures, determine in one case that separable dimensions were processed independently, a lot of the time in a serial fashion. But for integral dimensions, they seem to be pooled into a single holistic channel. Of course, there is another tool that falls under the framework of systems factorial technology, another characteristic of information processing models, which is how do they change when you change the workload that they have to deal with. This is called capacity. The idea is does the overall rate of processing of the system slow down as you move from processing a single item to processing 2 items or 3 items and so on? Does it remain unchanged, in which case you have an unlimited capacity processor? Does it even speed up? So we went to our results and applied this measure, and of course it didn't work. So the general idea, the general link between the mental architectures and their capacity is such that under certain assumptions, serial processing should give you a limited capacity process. And we found serial models with unlimited capacity, sometimes supercapacity. Coactive models should give you a supercapacity process, but we found coactivation with limited capacity. And of course, it turned out that we had misinterpreted our experiments. We weren't dealing with a change in workload at all. In fact, what we were dealing with was a change in the conflict between the dimensions. Let me illustrate this with an example. So a simple example would be a categorization question: is a whale a mammal or a fish? Mammal, good, okay. In Australia, a lot of people say fish, and I think they're just being sarcastic. So there are a lot of different attributes you could probably call to mind to attempt to categorize a whale. The two most salient properties are probably the biology of a whale, which makes it a mammal. So this gives you some information that points you to the correct answer. On the other hand, whales live in an environment which makes them similar to fish. So this is a property which gives you information and points you to an incorrect answer. So just like Mario presented the eyes, Joe's eyes on Bob's face, there were two pieces of information, but they pointed you towards different responses. The eyes pointed you directly towards Joe, that was the thing you were attempting to identify, but the overall facial structure, the rest of the face, pointed you towards Bob, which was in fact incorrect. So there's a conflict between these two sources of information. You can think about this as this particular example as a conflict between some rule-based property and a similarity-based property. It's easy to see these types of questions if you think about another question where in fact you have congruent properties which point you in the same direction. Is a shark a mammal or a fish? So both now the biological properties and the similarity to other things in the environment both point you to the correct answer. So in one case you've got incongruent or conflicting information, which makes this question hard. And here you have congruent information, which makes this particular question easier. So the goal of this particular talk is to understand why and how conflict interferes with decision making. Now, it's well known that when you have conflicting sources of information, this slows down your response time. It has also relatively little effect on error, though in some cases it can have a large effect on error. The relative effects on these two dependent variables are much stronger for response time than for accuracy. The second goal of this talk, after we understand kind of why and how conflict interferes with decision making, is to see whether or not we can use this type of conflicting information to develop novel contrasts between different processing architectures. So previously, in thinking about these things in terms of capacity, we found some sort of predictions which didn't make a lot of sense. If we change the way we think about things, instead of thinking about capacity, if we start thinking about conflict in these particular situations, can we get back that type of diagnosticity from this type of measure? And then I'll show you some data which shows that in fact we can do that. So the previous example I used kind of contrasted rule-based evidence and similarity-based evidence, but we can contrast evidence which is just based on two different rules. So this type of categorization problem is very similar to the one that Mario just told you about. We've got one L-shaped category boundary here. We've got two dimensions which have to do with the height and the width of these rectangles. One of these rectangles belongs to category 1 because it has a height which is greater than this boundary, the horizontal boundary, and a width which is greater than this vertical boundary. And all the other rectangles belong to category 2 because in fact they've got a width which is less than some boundary on this dimension and a height which is less than some boundary on this dimension. Now, if I highlight this particular stimulus, you can see that the height is small, so it correctly satisfies the rule for category 2. So if you just looked at height, that would give you some good information about the correct category. But the width is large, so it incorrectly satisfies the rule for category 1. So it doesn't satisfy both of these boundaries, so it doesn't belong to category 1, but it does satisfy one of the boundaries, so it's providing you with conflicting information. One of the dimensions tells you it's category 2, the other one tells you it's category 1. So there are a number of different theories of categorization which we might use to explain this. I'm just going to tell you about one of them. This is a very prominent theory in the exemplar-based random walk model. The idea is whenever you're shown one of these stimuli and you have to assign it to a category, the way in which you do that is by retrieving exemplars from memory based on their similarity to the object that you're trying to categorize. This process continues for a while, and once you've accumulated enough retrieved exemplars from one category relative to the other category, you emit that category as an answer, the one which you've retrieved more exemplars from. Now, when you've got items which have conflicting information, the retrieved exemplars are in fact similar, the probe is in fact similar to both categories, so you end up retrieving information from both categories, leading you to a kind of an equivocal response, which is, it takes you longer to emit the correct decision. If you've got a congruent source of information, so something like this item, where both of the dimensions satisfy the rules for that category, then you tend to retrieve examples which are similar only to the correct category, leading you to make a faster decision. So that's one theory which can explain this type of conflict. Here's another type of situation where conflict has been studied in literature. These are another basic psychological tasks, 3 tasks actually, which have to do with stimulus-response congruency. So the extent to which the response you have to make is congruent with the information in the stimulus. One famous example of this is the Stroop task, where you have to name the color of the word but ignore the actual word itself. So in this type of task, saying the word, determining the color of the word red whenever it is printed in red is much faster than determining the color, responding the correct color green when the color green is actually, or whenever the word red is printed in green. It's even hard to talk about. This task is a related task. It's called the Simon task, named after one of the first guys to use it. In this particular task, the color of the cue and the shape of the cue tell you which particular hand you're meant to respond with. So if it's a green triangle, you should respond with your left hand. If it's a red star, you should respond with your right hand. Now, whenever you have a green triangle shown on the left-hand side, you're faster and more accurate than if you have a green triangle presented on the right-hand side. When you've got a congruency between what the stimulus is telling you to do and what you actually have to do, you're faster than whenever the stimulus is on the opposite side. Another example of this task would be something like the spatial flanker task, where you have to respond either left or right based on the direction of this arrow. The arrow might be surrounded by some flanking arrows which either point in the same direction or a neutral direction or the opposite direction. Again, you're much faster whenever they provide you with congruent information than incongruent information. Typically in these tasks, the center arrow that you're meant to respond to while ignoring the flankers isn't highlighted in the manner I've done here. I've just done that so you can see the congruency. So here's another model that's been designed to explain the Simon task, but it can also, you can think about how it would apply to these other tasks. In this particular model, the stimuli, such as cue, color, and location, are represented in a multi-dimensional space. So here you've got the location of the cue, and here you've got the color of the cue. These values are projected onto a decision axis, and the orientation of this decision axis moves around, representing how much attention you're giving to each of these dimensions. And because it's variable, the representation of the stimuli, so a green triangle on the left, ends up being variable. And the decision is made by comparing these decision axes to some criterion which separates each of the responses, and then effectively, once you've projected each of the stimuli onto this decision axis, you're left with signal detection theory. The type of prediction, the reason why you get faster responses for congruent items is because they provide you with much clearer evidence of the response that you're going to make. More of the distribution is much closer to the response that you're actually supposed to emit. Another example where you see this type of conflicting information is in an oddball visual search task. Typically the way this task is described is something along the lines of, well, it's easier to find an oddball whenever it varies on 2 dimensions than when it varies on 1 dimension, because when it varies on 2 dimensions, it's more salient. And then that's of course true. Here you have a case where only the length of the line varies. So this is somewhat more difficult. Here only orientation varies, that's also difficult. But when both of them vary, it's easier, and you're faster to respond whenever you have 2 things varying rather than 1 thing varying. I'm going to turn that on its head slightly and say that the reason why it's easier is because, in fact, whenever only one thing is varying, it shares information with the distractors which point you to the incorrect answer. So in fact, these one feature different, one feature similar cases are actually giving you conflicting information about the actual target. And there are a lot of theories of visual search which assume that you have some underlying initial salience map which is developed based on the local salience of those features, and this salience is then pooled into some sort of decision-making channel which drives your decision-making. Here's one example of that model where you've got an accumulator which accumulates the salience based on the length. Here's another accumulator based on the salience of the orientation. These provide you evidence which drives you to a threshold for detecting that target, and whenever you reach that threshold, you omit the target, and the time it takes you to get there determines your response time. A very common way of thinking about this type of oddball search is that, in fact, both of these differences are summed together and fed into a single decision-making channel. Now, if you remember from Mario's talk, each one of these models fall into a class of coactive processing models, because the information that you're getting from the stimulus is pulled together into a single decision-making channel. But that's not the only way in which you can process this type of conflicting information. So coactive models do provide one way of understanding the influence of conflicting information. The idea is that congruent targets are faster than incongruent or conflicting targets because the conflicting information slows down the incongruent targets compared to the congruent targets. One important property that I'm going to explain in a moment is that the stronger the incongruent sources are, so the stronger that conflict, the more it slows you down in a coactive process. Another way, but this is only one way of thinking about how that information from each of those dimensions might be combined or integrated. As Mario pointed out, we can also talk about parallel processing models or serial processing models as well. And what I want to explore is how each of those architectures explain the effects of having different levels of conflicting information. To do that, I need to introduce the idea of capacity. In particular, I need to introduce the idea of minimum time processing. So I'll present you with a simple task that you can use to kind of think about these ideas. In this particular task, what your goal is to say yes anytime you detect the onset of a dot. The dot can appear either on the left or on the right, or it can appear in both locations, or it might not appear at all. If it doesn't appear at all, you have to respond no, nothing was detected. So parallel models, a particular type of parallel models, unlimited capacity, independent, parallel self-terminating models, predict that the time to process the double target should be equivalent to the minimum time that you derive from each of the two single targets. So I'm going to specify here that we have a double target, and I'm going to call that A, B, and then we have two single targets, which I'm going to call A when it's on the left and B when it's on the right. And I can abuse mathematical notation here and just set up a simple kind of a relationship that the prediction from a parallel model is that the response time you expect from the double target should equal the minimum time that you derive from each of these two single targets on their own. Now, the appropriate mathematical notation, the way to express this relationship is in terms of the survivor functions. So this is the survivor function that we observe from the double target response time. That should be equivalent to the product of the survivor functions from the two single targets on their own under an unlimited capacity independent parallel self-terminating model. So Jim and his colleagues, Nazawa, used this property as a benchmark whenever they developed their measure of workload capacity. So here gives you some understanding about what the workload capacity function is attempting to capture. What we have here is a ratio now of the negative log of the survivor function from the double target over the negative log of the product of the survivor functions of the two single targets. So the negative logarithm of the survivor function converts these survivor functions into hazard functions, which gives us the very nice property that the parallel models, this type of unlimited capacity parallel model, predicts that this capacity function should equal 1 for all response time. So it gives us a flat function we can use as a benchmark when looking at the other models. Okay. What I want to do now is introduce some conflicting information. So rather than having nothing here, we're actually going to have 2 white dots. Here we'll have 2 black dots we have to detect. The task is the same. You still have to say yes anytime you see a black dot. But in fact, with the single targets now, they're no longer single targets because they're always going to be comprised of 1 white dot and 1 black dot. So you have 1 response that you make if you see 2 white dots, and another response you make if you see any black dots. But these stimuli now provide you with some conflicting information. On the one hand, there's a black dot there pushing you towards the correct answer. On the other hand, there's a white dot there which is pushing you towards the incorrect node. So you've got conflicting information. Now for a parallel model, it doesn't matter whether we introduce some conflicting source into the other parallel channel. The minimum time that we predict from the 2 single targets previously should be equivalent to the minimum time we predict here. And the reason for that is because I've set up this assumption that the dimensions are in fact processed independently. And this conflicting information source doesn't allow you to make a correct decision. And I'm focusing here only on correct decisions. So if you want to predict this double target, the prediction is that from a parallel, independent, unlimited capacity, self-terminating model, you ought to still be able to predict that from the minimum time you derive from these 2 conflicting targets. So we're no longer dealing with workload, because the workload of each of these cases is the same, but the congruency of the information sources varies. So here we've got a congruent, redundant target where both of the sources of information are pointing you in the same direction, and here we've got cases where they're pointing in opposite directions. So for a parallel model, congruent targets should be faster than incongruent targets. This would occur solely due to statistical facilitation, so the minimum time property. But there's no effect of conflicting information sources. And this has been known in the literature. Gordon Logan used this to examine the flanker task and argued that in the flanker task, whenever you see this effect of the conflicting information, this falsifies what you would expect under an unlimited capacity parallel model. And he used this as a motivation for modifying Klaus-Bundeson's theory of visual attributes model, turning it into effectively a coactive model that was able to explain that particular data. Now, capacity in a serial model, serial self-terminating model, predicts that the time to process the double target should be slower than the minimum time that you derive from the 2 single targets. So if we, again, run this task and derive the minimum time from the 2 single targets, a serial model, because you process just one of these, so the response time. So the assumption here is you're processing these channels in a serial self-terminating fashion. So as soon as you detect either of these particular onset of these dots, you'll emit a response, stop making a decision and emit a response. So the response time for the double target should just be the time it takes you to process one of these dots, which is equal to one of the single targets, but that's slower than the minimum time you derive from both. So we can add now, if we look at the capacity measure of serial models should predict that, certain classes of serial models should predict that this capacity function is less than 1 for all response times. Coactive models, I haven't really told you about them, but they predict something called supercapacity, which is a capacity coefficient of greater than 1. Now, if we introduce our conflicting information sources and see what serial models do, they predict that the double target, this AB target, will be faster or slower than the minimum. So a serial model, so the minimum time, all right, the minimum time of the single targets depends on the rate at which you can process both of these features. If, for instance, the distracting information can be quickly rejected, then the minimum time that you will derive from these two stimuli might be quite fast. Might in fact be faster than the time it takes you to process both of these targets if the time it takes you to process those happens to be slow. On the other hand, the distracting, conflicting information might slow you down a lot if you're trying to do this in a serial fashion, in which case the minimum time will be slow, the minimum time you derive from these two targets, meaning that it might be likely that this double target can be faster than. So the idea is that whether or not a serial model produces a double target response time which is faster or slower than the derived minimum time depends on the rate of processing of that conflicting source of information. So for coactive models, there's this relationship that the stronger the conflicting information, the more it slows you down. Weak conflicting information doesn't slow you down as much. You're pulling together now some information which points you to the correct answer and some information which points you to the incorrect answer. The stronger that information that points you to the incorrect answer, the slower your response gets. Parallel models don't predict any effective conflict strength. But for serial models, the prediction goes in the opposite direction. And the reason for this is because you're processing these things one at a time. If you have very strong evidence for the incorrect response, you can quickly reject it and move on to processing the correct response, the correct source of information. If you have weak evidence for the incorrect response, it takes you a lot longer to process it and move on. So we can in fact just modify the capacity coefficient function slightly by allowing now the single targets to have some conflicting information. I've indicated there by these subscripts, y and x, that I've put on these single targets. And I've given it a different letter just so we can tell them apart. I'm calling it resiliency, because I tried to call it capacity with distractors, but the viewer didn't like that. So the value of this particular function varies with the rate of processing of the conflicting information for all of the models except for the parallel self-terminating model. So to actually test this, what we need to do is use a task in which the redundant target, so this target here, the double target, is compared to conflicting targets, which have varying degrees of saliency of the conflicting information. And the task I'm going to tell you about is pretty much identical to the one Mario had just introduced. So here we have a particular target category where we have a factorial manipulation of information. I've labeled these, I've given them these labels here to indicate just how difficult it is to sort of reject each of these items or make a categorization decision compared to each of these boundaries. So this particular item has kind of low discriminability on both of the dimensions. So I've tagged it low. This one is easy because it has high discriminability on both dimensions. It's very far from both of these boundaries. I've tagged that high. For the contrast category, I've listed our double target here. And then we also have two conflicting targets on both dimensions. One of them has a conflicting bit of information which is very far from the boundary, so it's a strong, gives you very strong evidence for the target category, which is actually the incorrect answer in this case. And another one has very weak evidence for the target category. The level of the good information that you want to use is always the same because it's equally distant from that boundary across all three of these, certainly the same for these three statements here. So this incongruent source is hard to reject. It's weak evidence for the incorrect target category, but it's also gives you some evidence for the contrast category because it's quite close to that boundary. This particular conflicting source of information is easy to reject. It gives you very strong evidence for the incorrect target category. Under a serial process, it's very easy to reject this as being not providing you with the information you need to correctly make a contrast category decision. So what we can do is take the stimuli from this particular task, and what I've shown you here are the results of simulations for computing this RT function for both these low salience conflicts. So that would be the case whenever I compare this double target to these two double targets, to the case where I compare this double target to the two high salience targets. And what we can do is look at how those particular low and high salience target cases change as a function of the salience of the conflicting information for each of the models. So the first two models shown here are, so the red line here gives you the value of the RT function. The blue lines are bootstrap confidence intervals, but you can ignore those because they're just a function of how many simulation iterations they ran. They don't really tell us anything. The first two models, this serial model, this is a serial self-terminating model in which you always process one dimension before the other dimension. So it's a fixed order serial self-terminating model. This is a mixed order serial self-terminating model in which there is a 50% probability you process one dimension first, 50% probability you process the other dimension first. The key thing to note is that as we increase the salience of the conflicting information, the resiliency function actually decreases in magnitude, so it shifts down. So as the conflicting information becomes easier to dismiss, the derived minimum time becomes faster, making it less likely that the double target will exceed it, and thereby decreasing the resiliency function. So for a parallel model, that's the next model in line, there's no difference between these two functions because the conflicting information source doesn't actually do anything to the minimum time. So the rate of the conflicting information, the rate of processing of the conflicting information makes no difference, resulting in a resiliency of 1 across all t. For a coactive model, we see the opposite pattern. So as the conflicting information becomes stronger, the derived minimum time becomes slower, making it more likely that this double target will exceed it, and increasing the resiliency function as you move from the low salience case to the high salience case. For the parallel exhaustive model and the serial exhaustive model, we see similar patterns in that the low salience conflict slows down the incongruent targets more than the high salience conflict, meaning that the minimum time is slowed down more in the low salience case, making it more likely that the double target is going to exceed the derived minimum time, and pushing or making the resiliency function larger for the low salience case than the high salience case. So if we just went out and applied resiliency on its own, we wouldn't really be able to tell much about the underlying processing architecture. These curves on their own for just one of these cases don't really give us any clear signal about what the underlying processing architecture actually is. But as we vary the salience of the conflicting information, we get very clear patterns of the direction in which that resiliency function should move. So in fact, what we can do is just subtract these two functions and recover the identifiability of each of the architectures. So if we subtract now the low salience resiliency function from the high salience resiliency function, the serial model, serial self-terminating model, and the exhaustive models predict that we ought to see a resiliency function which is less than 0. The parallel model predicts that we should see a resiliency function which equals 0, and a coactive model predicts a resiliency function which is greater than 0. If we make some assumptions about the ordering of these distributions, the ordering of the conflicting information, and the invariance of the congruent information, then we can actually prove that these relationships hold. So this is sort of a novel measure of information processing that has to do with whenever you've got conflicting information sources. So let me show you some evidence that this actually works. So this is some work that was conducted with Mario and Rob Mazovsky, along with some others, where we use the SIC now, based on the target category responses, to compute some sort of index of what the underlying architecture was. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that data, and then I'm going to compare that to the predictions that we get out of this resiliency difference function. So just to remind you, these are the types of predictions that we'll be looking at from this particular task. So because a member of this target category has to be both greater than this horizontal boundary and greater than this boundary, we can concern ourselves only with the exhaustive SIC predictions. So we get an S-shaped function like this. That's evidence of serial exhaustive processing. A completely negative function would be evidence of a parallel exhaustive process. And this sort of mostly positive function with a little initial negative blip would be evidence of a coactive process. And we compute the SIC by taking the sum of the differences between the survivor functions for those particular items that Mario explained. Okay, so in this particular experiment, each one of these stimuli were shown to people one at a time, and they had to make a categorization response. In some cases, we told people, hey, we want you to look at the base of this lamp first, so the base is one dimension, and then we want you to look at the top of the lamp. So the top is the other dimension. There's a lot of other stuff varying here, but you can ignore that. In other cases, we didn't tell them what to do at all, we just let them learn. The results turned out the same either way. We found SIC signatures, which look like very clear serial exhaustive processing for the target category. We had independent modeling evidence, and also evidence from these particular data here that showed us that in fact they were processing these items in a serial self-terminating fashion. This was serial exhaustive solely due to the nature of the task. Our best guess at what people were actually doing was processing one of these dimensions and then stopping if they could terminate their decision after that particular dimension. We compute the resiliency difference function. We see that it's less than 0 across all of the response times, which is consistent with what I just told you about what we expect from a serial self-terminating model. Here's data where now we didn't tell them what we wanted them to do. We just let them learn these stimuli over time. Again, we saw very clear serial processing in the SIC, or very clear evidence of additivity. And again, the resiliency difference function is less than 0. Here's a case where we use integral dimension stimuli. So these are Munsell colors varying on their saturation and their brightness. Here, our best guess at what the underlying SIC was telling us was that, in fact, processing was coactive. So both saturation and brightness would be pooled into a single processing channel. Now when we compute the resiliency difference function, it's greater than 0, consistent with the idea that whenever you've got conflicting information, the stronger the conflicting information source, the slower the coactive process. Here's a case where now we've got separable dimension stimuli, but the dimensions are not located in different spatial locations. So if I show you these lamps, these are actually pretty big on the screen. There are probably 15 degrees of visual angle separation. So in fact, you could fixate on one dimension and then shift your point of fixation to another dimension. So it's perhaps not surprising that we found serial processing. For these stimuli, though, both of the features now, the saturation of the background of the stimulus and the position of this inset vertical line are in the same location. Here we find the processing sometimes looks serial and other times looks parallel. Using some parametric models, which I'll talk more about tomorrow, our best guess at what people were doing was something like a mixture, a trial-by-trial mixture of serial and parallel processing. Sometimes they process the dimensions in serial, sometimes they process them in parallel. This is following on from one of the questions that came after the last talk. The resiliency difference function in this particular case is less than 0, consistent with some serial processing for the contrast category items, even in the case when the SIC signature looks mostly parallel. So those were 4 examples where we had independent evidence about what the underlying processing architecture was based on the SIC. We can also do tasks like the Simon task, where now we don't have any independent evidence, but we've got some theoretical suggestions that processing should in fact be coactive. And whenever we compute the resiliency across a number of observers who completed the Simon task, most of the time it's greater than 0, as you'd expect from the theoretical model that I presented earlier. And we did the same thing for the flanker task, and again found that the resiliency difference tended to be greater than 0, supporting the idea that there's some coactive integration of the target information and the distractor information. So in the latter 2 situations, we didn't use the full power of the system's factorial technology, but just using the original task design, we could go in and apply this new measure and tease out something about the information processing architecture, particularly how it processes this conflicting information. So this resiliency difference function quantifies the relationship between congruent and incongruent targets in the same sort of non-parametric fashion that the other systems factorial technology measures do, so the SICs and the workload capacity measure. It explains why and how different models predict the cost for conflicting information. And it provides convergent evidence to other non-parametric measures. And it extends the domain of the systems factorial technology to conflicting information sources. It's limited in that it only currently deals with correct responses, but as I suggested, whenever you have this sort of conflict, it's likely to lead to an increase in errors as well. Certainly for the categorization tasks, accuracy was pretty high. We didn't have a lot of errors, so we could get away with applying this information, or this measure. Also in the flanker task and assignment task, we didn't have a lot of errors either, but you could expect that under a lot of more realistic situations, when you have conflicting information, you're going to make mistakes. In which case, one point of development that needs to happen is we need to extend this type of theory to deal with accuracy and not just response time. It's also currently eliminated the models exhibiting channel independence, and a lot of work coming out of Jim's lab, a lot of work done by Joe and Ami, has looked at whenever you have cross-channel dependencies in parallel models. The same sort of work needs to be applied here as well. And finally, just to give you a kind of another way of thinking about this, one of the things that came out of the work with Mario and Rob Mazovsky was that each one of these models makes unique predictions for the mean RTs from that contrast category. So here you've got your double target. Here is your low salience conflicting target. Here's your high salience conflicting target. And you see a very neat relationship here. So this is something which was noted just falling out of the simulations of these models. If you have a parallel self-terminating model, well, there's no effect of this conflicting information. If you have a coactive model, then you get an increase in the mean response time as the conflicting information source increases. But for a serial self-terminating model, it either stays the same if you've got a fixed order on one dimension, but it decreases on the other dimension, or if you've got a mixed order serial self-terminating process, decreases on both dimensions. And I'm not going to take you through all of this, but there's actually a very easy way to see this relationship. Well, I'll take you through some of it. I'll put it up here. If we take the capacity coefficient function and actually invert it, so now what we've got is something like the inverse capacity function, where you've now got the two single targets on the top of the equation and the two double targets on the bottom. Then, and we compute the difference between the high salience one and the low salience one, the conflicting information sources. Then you can simplify this so you get a nice sum of the differences between the high salience and the low salience case. I think I'll remove all the math there. So you've got a difference between the high salience conflicting source and the low salience conflicting source on one dimension, added to the same difference on the other dimension. So you just take a sum of the differences. Now, Jim showed in a paper in 1990 that if the hazard functions are ordered, then the means of those functions are also ordered. So in effect, if this relationship is true, then we can simplify that and look at something I'm calling the mean conflict contrast function, where you just can look at a simple difference between the means to get some idea about the directionality of things. And that maps back to these predictions that we saw falling out of the parametric versions of these models. So one final thing that I think this work kind of suggests is that whenever you've got this type of conflicting information or this distracting information, and you're computing a measure which is based on the minimum time, so something like capacity or something like the race model inequality. So the idea behind the race model inequality task is this is an experiment reported by Mordkoff and Yantis in '93. The idea was you had to respond yes anytime you saw an X or anytime you saw the color green. So again, you had two single targets. So this is an X on its own, this is green on its own. This is a double target, green X. We also had some non-targets. So these single targets are not pure single targets. They carry information about the non-targets. So this is also not an X, so it falls into this non-target category. This is also not green. So if you want to compute the race model inequality, you need to take into account the idea that whenever you've got this conflicting information, that derived minimum time can actually slow down. So any of those models, depending on the rate of processing of that distracting information, might be able to violate the race model inequality. And I think Jim used similar ideas to this to show that a serial exhaustive model could in fact violate the race model inequality. I'll leave you with that, and we can all go to lunch. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks very much. In the experiments that we've looked at, accuracy has not been a problem. I'm just proposing it as something that is a tough issue to tackle. One of the reasons for that is because if you think about a single channel model, there are a lot of different theories for how errors and error response time arise. So you've got, something like a diffusion model where you've got two boundaries. You're correct if you hit one boundary, you're incorrect if you hit the other boundary. As you start developing more complicated architectures, the way in which these errors can arise becomes a lot more complicated. So you could have a failure of one component of the architecture that doesn't lead to an error because the other component of the architecture still succeeds. Or you could have both components fail and end up at the correct answer. So there's a lot of complicated, the error response times end up being a probabilistic mixture of a lot of these different ways in which the components of these models can actually fail. So deriving the predictions for them is somewhat more complicated. So a bit of work that I see has to happen, but in the case where you've got highly accurate responding, like in the experiments I described, you probably go right about thinking about it.
Just how would you go about, I guess the way from a particular perspective on, you've got basically you're studying anti-configurality here. It's another way of saying with the anti and the pro, so to speak, you have general context effects, which again, develop AOKS to part of the study. How would you go about, say, doing a study where you, in some way, some of the design here might give you superiority of the double target simply because the conflict is worse, is a lot worse than your single target. So how would you see your study so that you can see both configural superiority as well as configural inferiority and yet teach them all out at the same time?
Great question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I think you'd have to first determine whether configural superiority was arising actually due to a configural processing. So I totally agree with Mario that the way of defining configural processing is probably something like coactivity. But you can also have things which look like configural superiority, which arise for reasons that don't have to do with coactivity. Have to do with other types of architectures. I'm not sure exactly I have got a good answer to how you would design an experiment to look at those sorts of things. I think it would depend a lot on the types of stimuli you're interested in, the kinds of things you want to do with them.
Okay, well, that's your homework. No, just kidding.
Questions? All right, let's send Professor. I'd like to thank all the speakers in the morning, so just give them a big hand.
For the participants.